Welcome to the Armada Podcast with your host, Kalorn.
Armada isn't about shooting. Armada is about navigating.
Fox Omega.
I don't know if it has more to do with point denial with these Republic fleets, because some of their ships can really take a lot of beatings.
And now, the Armada Podcast.
And we're live. Well, live tape anyway, on the Armada Podcast. Juliet Whiskey has a prior obligation tonight, but we invited someone from across the pond to cover our main topic today, which will be the UK World Qualifier. Fox, can you introduce our guest who stayed up really, really late for us over in the UK?
Unbelievably late. Yeah. We want to welcome Jammers to the podcast. He is an active member on the Discord. He's been he played in the UK World Qualifiers, and so we wanted to invite him on here and get some thoughts on both how he
also
plays.
Kicked my ass last week, so you know.
That's another reason why we wanted him on. Jammers, good morning to you. It's nighttime for us on Thursday, but very early for you.
Well, a very good evening to you all.
My first question is, how long have you been playing Armada?
Well, gosh, I've been playing Armada since back in 2014 when the game first rolled out. Funnily enough, actually, I went to the Massing at Sullust events that they were holding. I don't know if any of you heard of those.
No, please tell me about that.
Okay, they released Wave 2 early for people who went to this event. So if you came in the top 4, you could either choose the ISD, the MC80, the MC30, the Raider, or the Rogues and Villains pack. Now, at my local store, because they held this at all these events on the same weekend, my local store held the event, but funnily enough, my friend and I were the only 2 people to turn up, so I walked away with the MC80, the MC30, and the Rebel half, the Rogues and Villains pack, all for 10 quid, which was really quite something, and definitely solid, committed myself to the game.
That's a huge deal. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, so you've been playing since pretty much the very, very beginning. In this time, what other, we know we're going to get to the UK World Qualifiers here in a minute. What other major tournaments have you participated in since you started?
Well, I've been to 2 other, I suppose, national events here in the UK, other than the one this year. So I've been to quite a few locally and some regionals. So I've done, I've been around the scene for quite some time and done quite a few. Oh gosh, it's my alarm going off. Sorry, there we go.
It's time to wake up.
It's time to wake up and record the podcast with 2 assholes from the United States.
Yeah. So 2 Texans who thought this was a good idea. What would you say? You've played a long, long time. As you've played, have you developed into a particular play style? Could you identify what are the types of fleets that you like to play, or the play styles that you kind of see yourself fitting into?
You see, this is a question I've really thought about for quite a while, actually. I think at the very start of the game, I played an awful lot of MSU. Like, double MC30 was the go-to for me. I really quite liked it, and I was quite often playing Rebel. As time went on, I actually started really enjoying playing Empire, and I sort of transitioned into using larger ships more aggressively. So instead of sort of setting traps with MSU, I would charge head-on in with more aggressive forward facing fleets. And I think that's sort of where I'm at today.
Still with ISDs in the Empire, or are you finding yourself branching out into the newer factions?
I think I'm still very much playing in the Empire. I'm finding my feet with the Republic and the CIS.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's super interesting, because looking at the fleet that you took to the UK World Qualifiers, which we'll talk about here in a minute, it's full of in-your-face action and I'm going to enjoy talking about it with you because you got wide area barrage in there, which I think is such an awesome upgrade to include in there. If you could give advice to you playing the game 8 years ago now, what would you tell them?
Gosh, I would say, I suppose at the moment you think your plan's falling apart, just grit your teeth and carry on. Because at the moment at which your opponent has sort of convinced you that their attack run is working, that's the moment you need to really knuckle down and carry on. You're going to often just like sometimes you might I see a lot of people peel off and just lose their nerve, or not lose their nerve, but you know what I mean, sort of just become a bit daunted by the prospect of taking on whatever head on, but really just stick the course, roll the dice, and ultimately you might win, or you'll have an extremely fun time just face planting whatever your opponent has thrown at you.
Or you'll watch your opponent roll all blanks like someone did last night.
That was me. I rolled all blanks. That's I love that advice. Particularly when you're flying ships like ISDs or Kellorn flies his Starhawk, those bigger ships, win or lose, you're gonna have a blast. Sometimes literally. And I think that's awesome advice. Sometimes it's part of the strategy is just shove it in there and see what comes out. Last question, what would you say drives you at this point to play the game? You've been doing it now for 8 years. What keeps you coming back to this game?
Well, this is going to sound awfully cheesy, but it is the community. I've played a number of other competitive games, and the Armada community has been easily one of the most easygoing I've actually ever encountered, and it's genuinely one of the most alluring things to come back to the game. It's always a pleasure to see everyone, and also all of the events that everyone creates, even through the most difficult times we've all had recently, has been a genuinely inspiring thing. It's a really wonderful set of people we've got here.
I don't think that's cheesy at all. I think that nails it on the head for why I continue coming back. This is a game that somehow the community has arrived at this blend of competitive and sportsmanship and camaraderie and just co-enjoying the game together. And I think it's inspiring and it's a lot of fun to participate in. Absolutely.
So I did have a question for you, Jamers, in regards to, you talked about what advice you would give to one of yourself, basically, when you were starting the game. What we've noticed at certain points with people who have been maybe more recently coming to the game is them coming to terms with just the difficulty in like overcoming the learning curve of Armada and getting into the game where you actually start winning. How would you, or what advice do you give to newer players in getting into Armada and how to get over that kind of I'm going to get beat for my first 10 games type of hump?
Actually, this is a question I've really thought about for quite some time, because I think, gosh, the way to tell this to someone, I think you just have to say, ultimately, you're going to have fun causing your opponent to wonder why on earth you just did that, and you'll walk away doing that. Ask that question to yourself, but at the end of the game, you'll have a wonderful conversation with your opponent. You'll learn new things, and you'll come back to your next game an even better player than the one that you left.
That's good advice, because we've been having some people who have been struggling a little bit lately. And it's not necessarily the people who are brand new to the game, but have been playing for 1 or 2 years, and they're having a hard time like getting to the next level.
I think that's true of like all of us. I mean, like I went to my first ever tournament, as in like just a store thing, and I came third. I then went to my like a regional and came second last. And I think it wasn't until about, gosh, 2016 or 17, like a good 2 or 3 years into the game, that I began to become a much more to become more of a force to be reckoned with than someone who just sort of did okay here and there. I think you'll feel your way through, and also the type of playstyle that you're more accustomed to as you play more types of fleets. So I suppose that's something else I would say is try different things. If you think big ships are good, but you tend to be losing, maybe switch up to MSU and see how you feel with that.
That's great advice. I love that. Speaking of you placing in tournaments, let's talk about the most recent tournament you went to, the UKGE World Qualifier. There's not a lot of data out about the tournament. I was able to accrue everything I could. Gink had posted the top 8 on the Discord, and so I grabbed those. And so we'll go over those in a little bit. I want to ask some preliminary questions because there's not a lot we know. We do know that there were 38 participants. Do you know, like that attendance? What kind of faction spread did you see? Because we've got the top 8, and I know it's a lot of Imperial. I'm curious about whether that kind of extended out, or you could extrapolate that out to the whole field. Was it a lot of Imperial, or was there a good mix?
Well, gosh, there was a lot of Imperial. My friends and I took a quick tour of the hall and were like, okay, how many onagers can you see? And we were about, okay, yes, there are roughly, I think we counted something like 19 onagers.
Oh my god!
That's how you trigger the Armada tabletop server. By the way, is that there was 19 onagers there.
Well, if it's any reassurance, I think only 3 made it into the top 8.
Three lists with onagers. I think there was a double onager in there, right?
Yes. So there's only 2 lists with onagers made it into the top 8. It was it was by no means a surety that having an onager meant that you would do well. If anything, if anything, at this point in the game, people have sort of gotten used to their presence and understand how to fight them.
I absolutely agree, and I think that plays itself out in the top 8 because they pretty much ate each other at the bottom, was my understanding. Like they 2 of them got matched up in round 2 or round 3 and basically took each other out of the running. And because that's all you can do if you're an onager up against another onager, basically it's a dice race to some degree. That's interesting. So, I've as players who play in the United States, it's something I've noticed since I started playing is that Empire is very, very popular in the UK and in Europe. Is that a trend that holds up? Do you think that there's a lot more Empire play that happens over there?
Gosh. I was talking to one of the other players, I think Reese, who came 3rd or 4th at UKGE, and he's been a fairly consistent Republic player. And he said that you play Republic or anything else until you get mad enough and switch to the Empire. So I think, yes, it is popular, but it is because they seem to have, as a faction, they cater towards all tastes better than I think other factions do.
Well, it's funny, and I'm curious about your take here, Jamers. But I've been coming to the conclusion that rebel squads and rebel lists are the top of the pile right now, above the Empire. And I guess, where are you at with? Do you think that Empire is the top of the faction pile, or do you think that it's something else?
Well, in saying that they cater to all is also saying that they might do everything. Like, they're a jack of all trades. They do everything to a certain extent, but some factions will do things to an even greater extent. They'll lean into it even more. I do think that Rebels, MSU, and Squads is extremely strong right now, and they do it very well. I find that's one of the hardest lists to fight, and that's funnily enough, my downfall at UKGE was my first list in the top 8 was against the winners MSU, and I do find it more difficult than any other archetype to fight, and mainly from the rebels.
That's a that's a well thought out opinion, and I absolutely agree with it. I think Empire. I feel like Empire gets a bad rap because they don't have they don't have one particular thing that they do very, 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 very well. But you can generally find any kind of play style within that faction that you want to do, and they're going to be generally good at it.
I also think Empire have the coolest looking ships, and that plays a big factor in people wanting to play them.
That is a fair comment. They do have some exceptionally wonderful ships. The Gladiator is such a lovely little thing, and the Angry Moustache or the Onager is a wonderful design.
I've never heard it called that before. I'm so stealing that. That's amazing. Before we get into your fleet and the top 4 Jamers, one of the things that's kind of our Fox and I's pet topic is the CIS. And the CIS were the one faction that was not in the top 8. Were they underrepresented in the field as a whole? Did you see very many CIS fleets? Can you give us a kind of an estimate of how many out of the 38 were CIS?
I probably couldn't tell you how many were CIS, but I can tell you that I suppose comparatively there were substantially fewer. Like Republic and CIS were definitely not as well represented. However, CIS players did do well. Like I think round 3, I was on table 3, and my opponent was a CIS player. So just because they weren't represented didn't mean you couldn't do well with them.
Hey, that's something. That's something. Table 3, round 3. I'll take that. That's fine. Yeah. I'm not gonna say I'm saddened that they didn't appear in the top 8, but I really would like. We're seeing these Republic fleets start to show up, and I don't know if it has more to do with point denial with these Republic fleets because some of their ships can really take a lot of beatings and still stay on the board. I'm not sure what it is. I'm hoping that soon we can start to see more of those arrive into these day 2 type events. But hey, Jammers, I want to jump into your fleet. You did make day 2. There were a couple players that dropped out, I believe, in the top 8, and so that allowed you entry into day 2, and your fleet in particular I want to talk about. I'm going to run through it real quick, and then I want to pick your brain about how you arrived at the list building for this fleet, because I find it very, very entertaining to look at, and it's a fleet that I would love to fly. Like, it's got a lot of the pieces that I find are really, really fun to fly. So you are it's 390 points. That's a 10-point bid. We're going to talk about bids later because the bids here are wild to me. You have a Gladiator 1 with Montferrat. You got Ordnance Experts, Engine Techs, all the usual stuff, Demolisher. But then you throw a Wide Area Barrage on there. And then you have an ISD Kuat with Thrawn, which is great. Nita, great insurance for Onagers. Varnillion, which I find to be really entertaining. I'm assuming that's for an accuracy right when you need it. ECMs, Point Defense Ion Cannons, Wide Area Barrage again, and Chimera. And then 2 Gazantes, 1 with Titus and Munitions Resupply and Suppressor, 1 with Vader Officer and CommsNet. And then you got 4 squads, really flexible squads, Jindam, Merrick, Sienna, and Muller. Walk me through your game plan here. What is your strategy going in with this fleet? Because it's a lot of black dice. It's a lot. It seems like it requires a lot of coordination. I want to hear how you arrived at this archetype.
All right. So basically, what I enjoy doing to go into tournaments is to take something where I can explore the game space. Therefore, I feel like I can actually sort of like try and pull something over, like the wool over my opponent's eyes, by using cards or a combination of things that they wouldn't be expecting. So with Wide Area Barrage, that doesn't see much play. and I can understand why its utility spikes dramatically depending on what's going on and how closely they fly their fleets together. So with Wide Area Barrage on Demolisher, I found out that has the greatest utility because it rolls 4 black dice. With Thrawn, you can have a nav plotted on the ship and Confire with Thrawn or whatever variation you so choose, and then you're rolling 5 black dice. And then that turns into 3 splash damage onto whatever you so choose, and that can kill a scatter ace in one go without you having to even bother engaging it with your forces. And I find that little bit of damage, and perhaps even just onto another ship or onto squadrons, can really tip the balance. I think I leaned into it too heavily with my Kuat. I should have had an ISD too, but on the whole, it was actually quite useful against some other like heavy ship lists because I would go in just straight in, speed 3, charge in, hit as hard as I could. Now with Varnillion, the actual plan for her is, because I would be going first ideally, was out of my side arc, roll the 2 black dice and red and blue, hopefully get a hit crit on the black dice, swap out the blank red on Varnillion, and then on the major run, Confire and that to go up to 5 black dice and really hammer away on the damage.
Oh man, I like that interaction. That's huge. I've typically seen her used with accuracy generation or, just raw damage, but using her to proc more, to get more of those hits in there and maybe even guarantee the crit if you can't get it the first time. That's huge. I want to take a step back though. I want to roll back a little bit. You mentioned in retrospect that probably an ISD2 would have been better. Walk me through that. Why do you feel that way?
I needed more long-range clout. When coming up against MSU lists, I really regretted not having more ways to shoot from greater distance, because with the Kuat I still had to charge head-on in, and that put it at far greater risk as it left the field on the way out. It's much better to be able to sort of slowly move in and have them take some more risks coming towards you, and also have Demolisher fly around the edges, picking them off as they try and move in different directions.
One of the things that I noticed when you and I played Jammers, and I brought my my Radis fleet, it is a real nasty piece of work for basically any Radis fleet, because Radis fleets have to be at that range. They have to be at that close kind of range where you don't have any choice but to eat the wide area barrage damage.
It is quite a useful list when it comes to playing certain lists, and as I say, utility with wide area barrage spikes in certain situations. Against Radus, which is a list that I used to find quite difficult fighting, the utility spikes massively because everything's so tightly packed together at the point at which the Radus player wants to be able to start trying to go in for the kill. That's their very strategy works against them with that particular card.
Yeah, that was the first time I'd ever seen someone use that card, and I was like, "Wow, this card is like tailor made to just destroy Radis." So I thought that was really interesting. I I did want to talk for a minute before we go on to the top 4 here. We had gotten the bids and the squad points for the top 8 in it, and we just got done last week talking about Texas Open, which is the one that I won a couple of weeks ago here in Houston. And in Texas Open, in the top 8, we had the lowest squad points was 71, and we had an average of 109.5 points of squads in the top 8. In the top 8 for the UK World Qualifier, there was somebody that went completely squadless, and the average squads was 90. I guess in the tournament that you played in here at the UK World Qualifiers, and in the kind of the European meta in general, if I can be so bold, what is the role of squadrons in your fleets, and have you seen squadrons numbers creeping up recently, Have they been pulling back? We've certainly here in the Texas meta have seen squads really creeping up towards that maximum on most of the top end fleets.
Well, I think there's a number of factors affecting the number of squads used. The biggest factor, I think, has been the release of rapid reinforcements, which have added a number of very interesting squadrons into the game. Going into UK World Qualifier, I did think that I needed to have substantially better squads than I had used in the past. Typically, I use squads as deployment fodder, so I'll have cheap generics, maybe one unique. In the new meta, I'll max out. I'll go 4 uniques, because I think there's a very real chance you're going to come up against some dedicated squadron lists that want to do damage, and you're going to have to slow them down with some much stronger counter squads. Another factor, I suppose, being very humble, is the fact that there was a big event held a month or so before the UK World Qualifiers, which I won, held in the north of England. And I took a list to that even German players were coming up and saying, yes, you're the Alderon guy. In fact, another chap literally copied my list. And I was very, very humbled that he did. I was also very humbled to beat my own list that I had created for that event. So it was quite something to see that I'd had such an impact, and that was also something that impacted the bids, because I took a 12-point bid. So people were starting to go, oof, we need to have stronger ones to be able to defeat that. And people were quite surprised I didn't take the list that I took to the Alderon event. But as I explained there, I was like, no, once I've played a list and I've done the best I can with it, I move on to something else to explore a different element of the game space.
That's really where I've kind of been coming up against here in the last few weeks since playing in TXO and using that to win a tournament. It's like, okay, you've kind of proven what it can do. Playing it anymore just feels that it doesn't. You're not proving anything one way or the other. So I totally get where you're coming from with that.
It's definitely an interesting space in the game. Sorry, you were saying?
No, you're good. I was just going to get us diving into the top 4 if we're all ready for it. Let me pull it up here real quick. All right, so in 4th place we had Sebastian. He brought Sloniger. My goodness. 400 points.
I don't think we had to read through it. It's just a totally generic Sloniger.
It's very generic Sloniger, although it does include the new Darth Vader TIE Defender, so I guess that's noteworthy. And it squeezes a fire spray in there, so you got some rogues, and Taskmaster Grint on the Quasar for some raid protection. How are we feeling about Sloniger right now? I guess is really what we need to talk about, because this is a very standard build, and it does well consistently, but I think we're starting to see, Jammers, I think you mentioned it earlier, we're starting to see people are understanding how to address this, not only onagers in general, but this fleet in general. How do we feel about this?
I honestly think this is a really solid, Sloniger's never going to be a fleet that's going to be bad. I mean, Sloniger is a good fleet archetype. There's no getting around that. The thing about Sloniger is that it's one of those fleets that people are now saying, okay, I'm going to a tournament. I need to have an answer for the SSD. I need to have an answer for Akbar. I need to have an answer for Sloniger. I need to have I need to have an answer for a Starhawk. These are the things that people are building with their fleets thinking about. And I think it's really going to affect just how well Sloniger does. I think we're going to continue to see Sloniger, make it to day 2, making cuts, doing well. But I don't know that unless you get a Sloniger player that gets really lucky with their matchups, I really don't see a Sloniger winning a major tournament again.
Well, you see, it's actually quite interesting because I faced this in game 2 of day 2. Now, typically I'm actually all right at beating Sloniger, but the Sebastian is an exceptional player. I think to talk more broadly, though, about Sloniger, the big thing to consider is Squall on the Quasar, because a lot of people underestimate the fact that you could push up 3 fighters and hammer away at someone's defense tokens in turn 1. Typically, whenever I see Squall, I deploy very cautiously to be able to counter that, or find some way of putting some sacrificial fighters. So if I want to be more aggressive, I can deal with Squall's turn 1 push. I think that's one of the keys to be able to sort of deal with Sloniger, but also realizing where the Onager is going to be. You have to look at your opponent. Your opponent has to place that test bed very well, otherwise it's going to be vulnerable.
Nah, it's a fantastic point. It seems like that's a trend with a lot of these high performing Onager fleets is either removing defense tokens early, or as we'll see in a fleet that's coming up, making sure that early you cannot use your defense tokens by forcing you to deploy at speed 0. A lot of the inspiration behind these high-performing Onager fleets is exactly that. You have to eliminate targets early, and if you can't, the situation actually gets pretty hairy. Onagers don't stand up to continued pressure. And like you said, if you can deploy more cautiously, if you can set yourself up in a situation where that Onager deploys in maybe a not so great situation or at a great angle, either through obstacles or whatever it is, there's a good chance that if you can weather that initial Squall push, or if you can find a way with token management to get out of speed 0, the battle is very, very different. I agree that Sloniger will continue to perform well. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's not going to take any more tournaments, but I will say that what Keller and what you said is absolutely correct. This is a fleet archetype that you just have to start planning for. You have to think about it. It's a meta definer. Maybe it's not the meta itself, but it's a meta definer. Like when you build a fleet, you got to think about it one way or the other, either through your tactics and your strategy as you approach the game, or literally in the fleet building step where you think, okay, I gotta have some kind of answer for this.
So moving on for a second, I actually think that the next fleet, Charmo's fleet, Fox, is the most interesting of the top 4. And if you want to talk about it here, I really want to hear Jammer's opinion on why this fleet in particular was able to do well.
It goes counter to a lot of the community opinion about how to build certain fleets. Yeah, let's go over it. So this fleet is at 390 points. That's a 10-point bid. It's got 5 activations, and it's squadless, which I think is the number one thing that should be a standout. Out of the 16 fleets, the top 8 in Texas Open and the top 8 in the UK World Qualifiers, this is the only fleet that went squadless, and it clearly did well. It's an ISD2 with Moff Jerjerrod, Nita, ECM, point defense ion cannons, and went with XI7s for its turbo laser slot. Again, with Chimera. Chimera is just a great option in general. 2 Architans that are both identical with expert shield techs and TRCs. A Raider with Iden, Ordnance Experts, Flechettes, and Instigator. And then a Gazanti with Vader Officer and CommsNet. This is, particularly the Architans are extremely interesting. Yeah, I want to hear about how this did so well, because those Architans are built counter to what a lot of people describe they should be with those TRCs.
Okay, so 2 of my friends had the misfortune of fighting this list, and I have to say that Charmo is a fantastic player. My first friend on day 1 went up against it, and he had a huge squad ball, and genuinely thought he was a shoo-in, an MSU. I think he left that round getting 10-1. The Raider was used exceptionally well. This occurred also in day 2 with Reese's list. Charmer was able to get it in there. I think it was like at speed 3 with a nav token, and then slow down to 1. So it constantly, with Flechettes and Instigator, just pinned down heavy squad lists. And with Iden Versio, it stuck around for a lot longer than anyone wanted it to. And that bought the time for the Aquitans and the ISD to go and absolutely rain all sorts of horrible things upon the ships, clearing the way. And I think on the second day there was literally 1 victory token difference that cost Reese the victory.
It's with the 10-point bid. Is it wanting to go first or second?
I would assume it wants to go first to be able to get the raider off, so it turns off all the squads before the opponent gets to activate. I can't say for sure because I didn't play against it myself, but I did hear directly that it was extremely frustrating to deal with. So I assume that's how it would go.
Yeah, I could see it go either way. Like that, the raider with flechettes. I mean, it's not something that a lot of squad players think about anymore. I think they should. Flechettes, I think, could do very, very well in the meta right now, at least in Texas. But it's with 5 activations and a pretty hefty ISD too. I could see someone wanting to go second and denying some pass tokens and having some really good long range firepower that you have to move into. I could see it go either way. It's a very, very interesting fleet. Paul, what did you think about this, man?
I think that it's really tailored towards killing squad balls that need to be commanded. So you and I were talking the other day, Fox, about the one of the big disadvantages of both GAR and the CIS is that when you are using squad-based fleets in both of those factions, you have no choice but to command them, or they don't really do a whole heck of a lot. In CIS, it's even worse because you lose dice if you don't command them. Whereas I think that this fleet is also good against something like Sloan, where Sloan generally wants to be commanding the squads most of the time because you're trying to get them in and do things to ships. Where I think that this the kind of the vulnerability here, if you want to use that term, is against a rogue type of fleet. If somebody that's really banking on rogues, because there's no squads in this fleet to keep you honest with rogues, you could spread your rogues across the entire board and say, okay, yeah, you can lock down 2 of my rogues, but the rest of them are going to do what they want. So I think that's the answer here, but it's an answer that isn't an answer you can come up with on the when you see it across the table from you. It's an answer you already had to have done while you were making your fleet before you came to the tournament. So other than that, I do agree that in most cases this is probably going to want to go first and try and purely because of that that raider and getting that raider into a position that would stops the enemy squads from doing things. But I think he's also got a big enough bid that if he looks across the table and sees something like my Starhawk fleet that's got a bunch of rogues, he's going to say, "Oh, I don't want to deal with that guy's stuff. I'm going to go second." So I think that his bid is deep for both of those reasons, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's flexible. I think, if there's no squads across from you, go second. You've got 2 Architans and an ISD2 that can just put red dice downfield, and you got to move into it. He's got 5 activations. What are you going to do? You got to move into it, and he's going to be able to keep those Architans safe. So man, this is just an interesting fleet. I'm glad it did well, and that it did well in obviously a field that had a lot of squads. Really, really awesome fleet.
Yeah, we want to move on to James McCarty.
I do. Yeah, let's move on. Second place, 385 bid.
Was this the biggest Big Jammers?
It was certainly one of the biggest. Now, James is definitely a very good friend of mine in the Armada community. In fact, he specifically tailored his bid against the list I took to Alderaan, so that's one of the reasons why it's 15.
Keller, and this is a similar effect that you're having on our local meta. You bring a fleet that's 392, and now it's a race to the bottom. It sounds like Jammers did something similar to his local community.
It's all our fault, Jammers. It's all our fault, man.
Oh
Cackles
no!
maniacally.
Well, this is a twist on a fleet style that Sam made very, very popular on the West Coast. This is the Onager. This is a Ramadi Onager with Titus and Vernillion and Vet Gunners and orbital bombardment cannons. It doesn't have Cataclysm, which is interesting. Normally, you would see Cataclysm on a makeup like this. You've got two Gazantes, one of which has parts resupply and Darth Vader. The other one is a Naked Boy. And then you have an Interdictor with Nita, Auxiliary Shield Teams, Decaps, Grav Wells, Grav Shift Reroute, and PDICs. And then you got 6 squads, Sienna, Valen, Jindin, Merrick, Gamma, and Tempest. I like the inclusion of those two. I like Tempest Squadron a lot. I don't think enough people take it. This fleet is going second. I don't see any reason why it wants to go first, honestly.
So the interesting thing here for me is that it doesn't have Cataclysm and it doesn't have Hondo, but it does include Surprise Attack, which really surprises me because pun unintended there. But the whole point, in my opinion, of Surprise Attack in a fleet like this with an onager that has the Gravwell protectors is that you're trying to make them deploy at speed 0 on the station, then hit them with the onager on turn 1. Because if you don't do that, they're just gonna go up to speed 1. So I guess my thought here was like, okay, yes, I get what you're trying to do here, but why did you skip Cataclysm? Is this a fleet that you played, Jammers, or did any of your friends play this fleet?
None of my friends played this list, and I didn't get a chance to face James at the tournament. I think it's mainly the fact that Surprise Attack is just so difficult to fight against. And given the fact typically, unless you have Corvus, it will typically give up your flagship's position, and especially since he has Admiral Titus, it's going to be going at a speed that your opponent wants, that people will generally not pick it. I think there's an argument to take it, and I think you make a perfectly coherent one saying, yeah, actually it's not so bad without Cataclysm. But
well, if you look at the other options, abandoning mining facility is just a non-starter. You cannot, if somebody's got that, you just can't take it. We've talked about that. Fox and I have talked about that to the end. But here's a tip from Uncle Keller, guys. If you see somebody that has abandoned mining facility in their deck, don't take it. You'll be much happier. Doom Station, also they're farming a bunch of points. I've had a lot of success in choosing Surprise Attack because people look at it and think it's awful, but it's really not as bad as you might think to take.
No, I'm with you on that one. Sorry, Fox, you go ahead.
I guess there's a lot of moving parts here. To properly counter it with Surprise Attack, you need to have Hondo, you need to be flying Ozzel, there's a lot of elements that I probably was betting on people not having readily available. I don't see a lot of Hondo in these fleets, and so that's a bet that probably paid off. In fact, I'm seeing it in 2 fleets. I might be wrong.
But
No,
I mean, my point is here, even, okay, let's say for a moment that I took Surprise Attack and I say, okay, I've got I'm going to use my Starhawk list as an example. I don't have Hondo in it. I have no protection against this. You put down the station wherever he puts it, doesn't matter. I'm just going to put my Starhawk facing away from your fleet. And if you want to slow me up or speed me down, I don't really care. You're not the only thing that you might be able to shoot me. You're not going to be able to shoot me with any of these things on turn 1 because your onager doesn't have Cataclysm. That's what I just don't understand here.
Yeah, I mean, he might know something we don't. I mean, he got second place. Obviously there's some kind of the speed finagling that looks like is happening here. It's hard to completely visualize because is he Titus? Is he going to Titus the flagship, or is he going to Titus your nearest ship to it so it can't catch up? It's hard to say. He's got and the test bed it's got
Well, I mean,
medical
it's going to
team
be
on
at
it.
speed 0 because he's got Gravwell.
No, I know. So like exactly. So what's he doing? Is he forcing your flagship to go speed 1 and separate from the fleet while everything else goes slow? You know what I mean? Like that's an interesting concept that really I
Yeah,
guess doesn't
that's
get
why that's the one aspect of this fleet jammers that I don't get. The rest of it looks fantastic. If you take AMF or Doom Station, you deserve the ass kicking that you received from this guy.
From what I gather, he played an awful lot of Doom Station all day, every day. Um, but like, yes, no, I do think that there's definitely an interesting case that perhaps everyone would have been a lot better off picking Surprise Attack, given the way things go. But I suppose, yes, there wasn't enough token generation writ large and enough ways to deal with everything that he's got going on there.
Let's talk about the number 1 fleet from Daniel. 400 point, no bid at all. You give him first or second, he's going to be happy. And he's flying. This is the second Riken MSU fleet that we've covered here on the podcast, and we've only had 2 episodes, so that should tell you a lot. 4 CR90 A's all with TRC. No Jaina's Light. That's interesting. He's got Riken on one of them. He's got Ezra on another. He's got a GR75 with Torn, and then he's got a lot of rogues. Hera, Lando, Ketsu, a YT24 Rogue Squadron, and he's got Golden Wedge. This is an archetype that is doing work right now. I want to dig into why we think this works really well. Jammers, what's your opinion on this Riken MSU, this rise again of Riken MSU? Where do you think this is
And
coming?
you actually played this one, right, Jammers?
I did. Gosh, okay, so I suppose let's talk about how this game went to start with. I picked second, and Daniel chose Solar Corona. He set up roughly centrally, and I set myself up into a corner and faced my entire list towards the right-hand side of the board, and of course set the Corona up there. He came charging in very far, like really far around, and at that point I decided to spring my trap, which was using Chimera to bring in take evasive action and turn head on in as quickly as possible. Daniel, gritted his teeth and continued on the very wide around path. I managed to, and like we had a very interesting squadron battle in between, and this is where things became pivotal. I was able to kill his flotilla with an extremely lucky demolisher shot with an accuracy and enough to destroy it in one go. And I gunned down, I think, Wedge and a couple of others. But the fact that Wedge was able to stay alive with Recon was extremely useful for him, because that was able to break free one of the fighters, which meant that he could come and absolutely bomb my ISD. And had I actually played a lot more conservatively with my Kuat, I think it would have been a slightly different game. I think the Kuat would have eventually gone down, but I would have had enough time to kill a few other things and not been quite so overwhelmed by the rest of it. So I think MSU Recon is definitely back, because it is exceptionally difficult to plan and difficult to capitalize on the limited gains that you'll make, because it's really difficult to pin down any of those things. And when you do kill one of them, it's still going to have a go. And that's very, very difficult to counterplay against.
So one of the things I've always thought about Recon is that the key to defeating Recon is being able to kill multiple things in a single round. Is that something that you were going for when you faced this list, or was that just not even possible based on the way that he flew?
I was trying to get as much stuff off the board as humanly possible, but yes, because he did grit his teeth and take the long route around, that played in, and also the fact that I had very limited. I was limited in the level of like long range firepower that I had because I hadn't taken an ISD2, which could have applied a lot more pressure.
The interesting thing, the reason why I think Riken is doing really well right now is a lot of the long range artillery pieces we have in the game, from a defensive standpoint, rely on taking something off the board. Patriot Fist is too flimsy to not take something off the board almost every time it shoots, and it only gets one shot. And same with the Onager, the ignition shots, it needs to take something off the board. And when the pieces that you're shooting at have 2 evades and will not be removed from the board after you shoot them, the game plan gets very, very hard. And for that player that has the artillery pieces, I find it very, very entertaining that at a moment when a lot of people are complaining about, my pieces keep getting deleted by these long range pieces. Well, we have a commander that can exclusively prevent that from happening. Very, very entertaining that this is doing so well. I'm excited to see how this transforms.
So I did want to transition us to a quick topic here because we're running a little short on time. But bids have become a really hot topic over the last month or so, as we've seen the Armada community largely getting divided into 2 camps. Those who with essentially no bid, which is where the champion here, Daniel, was able to go with, or those with a significant bid, which, Jammers, you and I had our fleets that had bids, and then you saw the 385 point fleet here. So, Jammers, what do you feel like is pushing the bid in the meta? Is it pushing to go first? Is it pushing to go second? Why are people starting to bid again?
I think for a long time I've been saying that it's very much a second player game. So people are bidding to play the objectives that they've tailored their list for. So it's very much gone from the old days of bidding to, have that first alpha strike to completely take something off the board. It's definitely a case of, no, I really want to mine as much stuff from my abandoned mining facility. I really want somebody to have a horrible time dealing with battle whales that have, the not the exogorths, the purgils with mines on them. There's so many different variations and so many interesting things you can do with objectives that I think people want to be able to do that. And I think there's also an interesting counterplay where people go, everyone wants to play with their objectives and they're bidding for it. I'll just have 400 points and tackle it my own way.
I think another aspect to that is we're not seeing in really high level play a lot of 10s happening anymore. And so going second allows you to squeeze as much objective point opportunities as possible. You can guarantee, if you're flying your own objective, you can guarantee those extra 40 or 50 points more than your opponent. And that could be the difference between a tournament point or even a win. I think that's where we're at right now. And a lot of these players know it. And so either you're creating a fleet that doesn't care about those extra points because those pieces stay on the board, or you really, really need to squeeze as much as you can out of that juice, or out of the, the fruit, whatever you're squeezing.
Jammers, as someone who took black dice crit effects to a major tournament, how do you feel about the de-emphasis of players wanting to go first because the black crits are harder to get off in the meta?
I suppose that's definitely why I also included a Gunnery Chief Varnillion, so I could get as many in there as possible to counter Pedix. I think there's definitely, taking all of those, it was definitely a mistake to have leaned into it quite so heavily. I think having one ship that does close range stuff is enough. You're going to have to try and fight at medium and long range more often these days.
And I think that the change to evades makes a difference too, because these ships where you're trying to delete them and they can evade and re-roll a dice at close range, or discard a token and re-roll 2 dice at close range. I mean, now all of a sudden you're trying to get to 3-hit crits to guarantee a to guarantee that you're going to get a crit effect off. It's really brutal, and I think that that's one of the reasons that and the way pass tokens work now has really de-emphasized fleets that really want to go first as a rule. So this week we got a lucky drop from Atomic Mass Games with a revamp to Hera in her X-Wing. The new text reads for her ability: while a friendly squadron that has escort is at distance 1 to 2, it has adept 1. While this negates the ability of a Dar Talon to activate Hera's ability twice to give the squadrons Adept 2, it drastically simplifies keeping track of who has Adept and who doesn't, or who has Adept 2 and who has Adept 1. Um, as an added bonus, her ability was boosted from distance 1 to 2 from just distance 1. Now, Fox, last night you and I played a game where I brought the new Hera. What were your impressions of her on the other side of the table?
Oh gosh, well, it didn't help that I was bringing separatist squads. I'll tell you that much. So I think anyone who's saying this isn't a buff is lying to themselves, because it seems like in a pursuit of clarity, they actually created quite the boon to Hera. I mean, you no longer have to really. There was never a moment in our game where there was any question that Hera was in range. Like, distance 2 is such a long way when your squads are bumping heads. If you're used to the X-wing strategy with bigs of keeping all these X-wings together, there's no way one of them is going to get out of Hera range. It's so good. The amount of times that you were rolling above average on your squadron attacks, it was ludicrous. With Tauren thrown in there, it's a pain. It's hard to fully describe like just how tough this was.
Well, I mean, you dropped your invisible hand drop on top of my squads, and I will fully admit that I got lucky in the dice rolls that you got with your vultures. At the same time, as soon as you were done, I turned around and basically deleted all your squads off the board between Hera and the X-wings and Tauren. And I really felt like that was the moment that I was like, yes, this, like, Hera's great for helping the bombing runs. I agree, no question. But Hera and Tauren really step up the anti-squad potential of X-wings.
No, there's an awful lot to say about Hera. I think also the fact that distance 1 to 2, most X-wings travel at distance 3, so speed 3, so you're going to very easily get everything in place without much effort. It's a lot easier to deal with, to organize than a Biggs ball, and you can even, amplify it with that. So the new Hera is definitely extremely useful, and I think a lot better than what she was, especially for being able to organize everything in one big attack compared to like the previous incarnation.
Honestly, Jamers, one of the biggest things was that you're not telegraphing that Hera's going to go first every single time.
That's 100% correct. She is. It's just like, well, that's her effect. There she is. And life's so much easier for a Rebel player using it. And gosh, who needs BCC anymore?
I actually took BCC and stacked it until someone decided to blow it up with a stupid roll.
I was going to say the same thing, Jammers. Why do you even need BCC anymore as a Rebel player? You're not flying B-wing swarms anymore. Man, these X-Wings were so good. It didn't help either that I was testing out an invisible hand fleet, which, to be fair, was really good. I really liked the way it interacted, but oh my gosh, those X-Wings with Biggs and Hera, it's wall after
And
wall after
Wedge.
wall. And Wedge, yeah.
And Wedge, so the Wedge Yavaris roll when I rolled 7 dice against something.
You got 2 accuracies and 5 hits. You remember that?
I do remember
I just wanted to
that.
quit. you you, you one shot Grievous. That was gross. I didn't even know that was a thing that could happen. So yeah.
Jammers, how would you feel about two accuracies and 5 hits on 7 dice?
I'd feel thoroughly aggrieved. That's that's an awful lot of damage in one go. But that's very impressive. I think gosh, what was I going to say? It's definitely coming close to 3 a.m. What's it called? I'm losing my train of thought here. But n- um, yes, I do think that that amount of damage is extremely useful, and also I do think that the gosh, no, I've completely lost my train of thought there. Sorry, chaps.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Maybe we'll come back to that. But we do have our final segment of the night, and we very much appreciate you staying up late for us, Jammers. It's been really great to have you, and you've had some really great insights. So I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about our Do You Think segment. So in the Do You Think segment, we basically hit each other up for some hot takes from the current Armada community. And these hot takes are ones that we find in the various channels on Discord and things that you guys say, and we try and bring them on the podcast and discuss them as best we can. So, Jammers, you're up first, and the statement that we have for you to react to, Jammers, is quote: I thought that squadless play was dead the moment that Plo Koon was released.
While certainly one of the hottest takes, I do think that there's an element of truth in that. Trying to fight against a squad list, I think, in one of the earlier online tournaments when Player came out was very, very difficult. And I think that did contribute to a decline and why it was easy to take more generics and fewer uniques, because they weren't fighting squads, they were just there buying you time.
I think Plo makes squadless with non-redundant tokens just absolutely suicidal. I don't know why you would be flying no squads and one redirect right now, which I'm looking at you, the new factions. There's no reason why you should think that squadless is remotely acceptable unless you've got some kind of wild wackadoo plan. I agree with this
Like
sentiment.
Instigator?
Like Instigator, hey, that's a wackadoo plan that could work. Yeah, absolutely. Flechette wackadoodle Instigator, absolutely, that could work.
Yeah, Jammers, make sure you tell that guy that we called him Wackadoodle for the next time you see him.
For sure. But sorry, it's no Admiral Plo Koon, because I initially thought you meant Plo the fighter. No, yes, Plo Koon, the Admiral. Yes, no, he does make flying completely squadless, but I think he also makes flying with aces even more frustrating because, of course, he will lock down that particular. If I recall correctly, his ability affects fighters too, so it's going to be frustrating. But nonetheless, yes, you can mitigate him to an extent with just throwing generics at him whilst your big ships take out the flag.
So Plo as an admiral only affects when you're attacking ships, but he does allow friendly squadrons with adept, without adept, to gain grit when they're at distance 1 of something with adept. And believe it or not, that lost me a game, not in the not too recent past.
Yeah. Oh man, he does have such a wide-ranging effect. It is quite something, but I don't see him that often, which is interesting. I think there's a reasonably high skill level
You
for
also have
him.
to lean into a really big squad ball, and you usually have to lean into arcs, and that is a very specific archetype right now. But so Jammers, you've got a question for Fox to go off.
Oh yes. So the question for Fox is: I'm not seeing any role for the Raider to fit into where it isn't excelled by something with a similar cost.
That's a really interesting observation because we just got done talking about Instigator. I personally don't like it being used as a flak boat, but clearly some people know things that I don't. I think it takes a lot of skill to get it done, but I mean it's hard to argue with two blacks coming at you. with Callus even, or I don't think you take Callus on it anymore. I think Iden is stuck to it, but it's hard to argue with that with double evade. But Instigator is huge. I mean, obviously people like the lifeboat. I mean, there's no other lifeboat in the game that really makes sense. Really, period. Honestly, but
And
specifically
Corvus straight counters a surprise attack.
exactly. I enjoy Raiders as they are the ultimate. This piece has, like, if you ignore it, you have undervalued, like, as your opponent. If you ignore it, it's at your own peril. If you focus on it, it's at your own peril. It is a piece that you will regret not paying attention to, and it is also a piece that, as if you have it in your fleet, you can utilize to make it seem like it's a big threat. I've done it against an SSD, where I made an SSD with Gergerod turn just enough towards it to get the entire rest of my fleet around that front arc and ultimately win the game. And it's like, it's just a Raider versus an SSD. It wasn't going to do much, but I made you think it would. I think it has a lot more fake out ability than people give it credit for, and it's a great support piece. So that's where I'm at with it. Sure, like, it doesn't have a specific role, but yeah, I think I think it can definitely do a lot. Okay, well, I've got my question for Kellorn. Here we go. It's a longer one. Dice add commanders are the only ones that actively contribute to the always active objective of every game of Armada: murder your opponent, and thus should always be used unless you have some really overriding reason to not want to win. I want to hear your response to that.
So, this is one of those things where it's true and it's not true, right? Like, and so in effect, dice add commanders are saying, I'm going to take most wanted, apply it to all your ships, and I'm going to have it on every shot, on all of my ships. And there is value to that. Most wanted is an objective that a lot of people don't like to take, because that extra dice, particularly against MSU fleets, can make a big difference. The trap here is that Armada isn't about shooting. Armada is about navigating. And I really want to hear Jammer's thoughts on that, but while he's like half asleep and just about ready to call it a night here. So this is our last thing, guys.
Well, before we go, like, thank you very much for having me on. It's been great. But like, no, when it comes to this, I actually couldn't disagree more. I genuinely think commanders like Bale or Thrawn or Gergerod, they all add so much, because, as you say, Kalon, Navigate is one of the most important ones. And, with Gergerod, that, you don't even need to in certain instances, or your ISD can start doing things that no one ever thought it could. And I think it's better to be able to get out of a shot than be able to add more into your shot, because you're going to survive longer and be able to shoot at somebody more often. So yes, no, I do think that, like, other commanders that don't add dice are in fact far more effective in this game.
And we haven't even talked about Dooku, which we unfortunately don't have time for Fox to wax poetic about his favorite commander in the game. But
No one
Jammers,
wants to talk about Dooku. No.
Jammers, I really want to thank you for staying up late for us. I think it was a fantastic episode. I think you had some great comments, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully, maybe even see you in the what's it called, at Adepticon. I may make an appearance. We shall see.
I don't know if I'm going to make it to the Adepticon. That's like, that one's a really tough for me to get to that particular weekend. But I really would love to go if I. Oh, you're talking about Adepticon Worlds, right?
Yes.
Yes, Worlds I'm absolutely going to go to, as long as they have the last chance qualifier. And I think you're on the same page, right, Matt?
That's correct. Yeah.
So he and I'll probably travel together. So, all right. Well, everyone have a great night, and we will catch you next week.
Awesome. Have a good night, guys.
All the best. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Armada Podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, keep up with the show on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at Armada Podcast. Join us on Discord with the link in the show notes. Until next time.